So normally people say the best camera that you have is the one that you have on you in your pocket. Well, generally pants have at least 2 pockets. So what we're going to do is we're going to pitch a phone up against a high-end compact camera. So we've got an iPhone XS today, as well as a Sony RX100 IV, and we're going to see which one comes out on top in terms of image quality and whether investing in a high-end compact camera is worth the price. Let's go. So our colleague Jack has kindly lent me his iPhone XS for today's shootout, and we chose his XS because the price point is kind of similar to the RX100 IV. So an XS will set you back around 1,600 Australian, whereas full retail on the RX100 IV will set you back around $1,400. So let's talk about the user experience in terms of photography wise on both of these devices. So with the iPhone, obviously being a phone, its primary purpose is really not to use the camera function. So to access the camera, you'll have to open an app. And if within that app, you can do limited changes to aperture, ISO, and you can tap around the screen just to get your focus. However, the screen on the iPhone is quite large. So on the XS, you get a 5.7-inch screen, which works pretty well in daylight as well. And in terms of viewing images, it looks quite nice on the phone. Comparing that to the RX100 IV, where it is a camera, so it's a lot more intuitive ergonomic-wise. You've got a shutter button, which on the iPhone does have a shutter button, which is the down volume rocker button, which may not be really accessible at times to use. So ergonomically wise, it's just a lot better having an RX100. You've got all your dials that you need to change your aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, and you have a plethora of settings to change as well. In terms of the actual screen on the RX100 IV, it is pretty neat that you can flip it 180 degrees, which kind of emulates using a front-facing camera, but you still get the full resolution sensor and high contrast and clarity from the Zeiss optics. In addition as well, the screen is not as daylight viewable as the iPhone, but to compensate for it, it does have a neat pop-up viewfinder. So what we're going to do now is we're going to put these two up against a image quality shootout. So our first 2 tests that we're going to do is we're going to test the wide angle element on both of the cameras. So I'm going to shoot the RX100 IV at its widest and use the iPhone XS at its widest, and then use the telephoto mode on this and zoom the RX100 to its full potential at the 3x optical zoom limit. And I'm going to take those 2 photos against mud in place. So we've got a nice wide feature here with a lot of buildings and lines just to test distortion as well as clarity with the buildings. And then we also have a clock tower up there, which you're going to take the telephoto test as well. So let's go. So what I noticed after shooting the 2 photos is that the iPhone natively in the iOS camera app, you can't actually really change aperture in it, and only in portrait mode can you change that. There are third-party apps, which I don't remember off the top of my head, but you can use third-party apps to change the settings in the camera, which requires you to download an extra app just to access more features in your camera. Whereas what I really liked about shooting with the RX100 just then is that I got to choose what aperture I needed to shoot those buildings, which is around f9, f10, and then shooting stuff like this, I could open it up and have a shallower depth of field just to get a bit more pop as well. Whereas I don't really have that option in the iPhone, as it's basically fully automatic, and the only thing I can really change is the brightness and the darkness of the exposure. So what I've done is on the RX100, I shot the portrait at f2.8. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to emulate the same f2.8 bokeh on the XS, because you can scroll through and you can choose your depth of field. So you're just going to do 2.8, and we're going to compare the 2 photos. So just testing the portrait mode on both, the images do look pretty good off the portrait mode on the iPhone, and getting to choose through that depth of field is pretty cool. Now, once you drop it really below f2.8 on the portrait mode, the fall off on the edges of your subject does look a bit weird because it is artificial. So if you're going to go for a more truer bokeh experience. You can really tell the difference between the RX100 Mark IV and the iPhone. So now we're going to compare both cameras in terms of the video user experience. So we'll first start with vlogging. So in terms of vlogging, it's really cool that the RX100 does have a 180 flip screen, so you can see your framing. What you have to keep in mind though, because of how close the buttons are and how sensitive this jog wheel is, you can easily take your settings out of proportion. So I had all my settings ready. I had it at 150th, and then before I went to record, it was at 160th because my finger accidentally touched the wheel, so I had to jog it back. And I just did it again just then. Whereas with the iPhone, you literally can just hold it and there's no buttons in the way, so you'll definitely know that you won't be touching any settings. However, in saying that, in terms of settings, it's so much easier to change your settings in the RX100 in terms of frame rate, aperture shutter speed, because you've all got your dials there. You've got a quick menu to just quickly access all the file formats that you need. Whereas with the iPhone, it's a bit tedious. You have to go out into settings. You've got to open up a different menu to go to that. And that's like an extra 4 or 5 steps just to get where you need to be. Whereas with the Sony, it takes like 2 steps and you're there already. In terms of the screen, yes, like I said before, the iPhone's a bit more daylight viewable, but honestly right now, we're about midday in Sydney and the screen's pretty good. I can see my composition. I can see the face tracking come up and it detects my face and it tracks me as well. So all in all, I think the RX100 does pretty well, even in bright daylight.
Looking at video quality, firstly, the iPhone is surprisingly good. The dynamic range isn't too bad out of camera. However, once you're trying to recover the highlights and shadows, it does seem to struggle. The 4K video is nice and sharp, and Apple processed colors quite nicely. One of the things I didn't like about the iPhone is the lens gives some bad lens flares at some angles. Onto the RX100, no surprise here, the video quality is awesome. You're able to recover highlights and shadows a lot easier, as well as have the flexibility to change pitch profiles. A big bonus as well when shooting video with the RX100, it does have built-in ND filters. However, unfortunately, it doesn't have a microphone input. Looking at both side by side, for low light, the RX100 blows the iPhone out of the water, which is due to the larger sensor.
Now we're doing an audio test with the RX100 Mark IV and the iPhone XS. Not sure which one is better.
Audio quality on both set to auto. The iPhone is able to isolate the right sounds a little bit better straight out of camera compared to the RX100. And lastly, looking at slow motion, comparing both 120 frames per second at 1080p, the iPhone unfortunately loses out on a lot of its sharpness and dynamic range compared to the RX100.
So our final thoughts, we were quite impressed with the photo and video quality coming out of the iPhone XS, but comparing the difference between the RX100 and the iPhone, there is a clear night and day winner. In terms of the image quality, user experience, low light performance, as well as sparse features that you have in a dedicated camera such as the RX100, it really is a lot better, especially if you are going to be a person that's traveling and are looking to capture some amazing memories and looking to print or share online with your friends. Having a dedicated camera such as the RX100 will be able to capture those memories a lot better. However, if you are really not too much of a camera enthusiast and don't really care too much about your imagery and just need a quick snap, then the iPhone XS does do a pretty decent job. But honestly, for me, I would honestly prefer to go for something like this, as it does fit in your pocket and you do get that extra range of flexibility and versatility when you need it. If you have any questions on the Sony RX100 Mark IV or have any future suggestions for phone versus camera shootouts, pop them in the comments below. Make sure to follow us on our Facebook, Instagram, and our blog, which links to those are in our description below, just to stay up to date with what's going on in store, as well as our latest events. And as always, if you enjoyed our video, hit the like button and the subscribe button so you don't miss out on our next update as we upload videos weekly.